I never thought I'd be standing here, in this hushed, marble-lined hall of power, my hands trembling as I prepare to testify before Congress. My name is Rachel, and just 6 months ago, I was an ordinary compliance officer at a large financial firm, a place where we wore tailored suits and masks of polite indifference. My job was simple, at least on paper: make sure we played by the rules. But behind those glass doors and polished floors, the truth was twisted and hidden like a dark river running under a city. I'd always believed in doing the right thing. Maybe it was something my father drilled into me when I was a kid. He was a union man, taught me that honesty wasn't a choice. It was a responsibility. So when I started noticing numbers that didn't add up, signatures that seemed off, I didn't just look the other way. I dug deeper. At first, I thought it was a simple accounting error, a decimal out of place, a line item misfiled. But the deeper I went, the more I saw that this wasn't a mistake. It was fraud, plain and simple. And worse, it was being orchestrated by people I'd once trusted. I remember the moment it all clicked. I was in the office late one night, the quiet hum of the copy machine the only sound in the darkened floor. My computer screen glowed as I pored over the records, each document a puzzle piece in a picture I didn't want to see. My supervisor's name kept showing up, approvals he wasn't authorized to give, loans that didn't exist. My gut twisted into knots as I realized what I was looking at. I confronted him the next day, my voice shaking as I demanded answers. He looked at me with a calm, practiced smile and said, "Rachel, you're reading too much into this. Let it go." But I couldn't let it go. I'd seen too much. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath me. I didn't know then that this was the first crack in the world I thought I knew. A week later, I was called into a meeting with HR. I thought maybe they were going to thank me, or at least hear me out. But instead, I was met with cold stares and a stack of papers, my termination notice. They said I was being let go for performance issues, but we both knew what that really meant. I was fired for daring to tell the truth. Walking out of that building, cardboard box in hand, I felt hollow, angry, betrayed. All the years I'd given, all the loyalty I'd shown, it meant nothing the moment I challenged their lies. As I watched the city skyline blur through my tears, I promised myself this wasn't the end. They could take my job, but they couldn't silence me. I was going to find a way to make my voice heard, even if it meant taking on the very people who'd turned their backs on me. In the days after I was fired, I felt like I was drifting through a fog. My apartment, once my safe haven, felt cold and empty. The walls seemed to close in on me, mocking the illusions I'd built about loyalty and hard work. I kept replaying that moment in HR, the way their eyes avoided mine as they handed me the papers, how my supervisor had stood silently in the corner, not even offering a word of explanation. My mind was a carousel of questions and half-answers, spinning faster every time I tried to calm myself down. I thought maybe if I stepped away, let it all settle, the truth would stop clawing at me, but it didn't. I'd close my eyes and see those numbers, those signatures that didn't match. It was like they were burned into the backs of my eyelids. I couldn't escape it. I tried to convince myself to let it go. My friends, what few I had left, told me to move on. "Rachel, you're out now, let it be," my friend Lila said over coffee one morning. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were tired. She meant well, but she didn't understand. I couldn't just forget what I knew. Every night, I'd sit at my kitchen table, documents spread out like a mosaic of betrayal. I'd managed to save copies of some of the files before they locked me out of the system. Proof, I told myself, though it felt more like a curse. My hands would shake as I flipped through the pages, each piece of evidence pulling me deeper into a darkness I wasn't sure I could face alone. The signs kept coming. Calls from blocked numbers, silent on the other end. Emails that disappeared as quickly as they arrived. I knew it was them. Some warning, some threat. I started glancing over my shoulder when I walked home at night, convinced I could feel eyes on me in the shadows. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling never left me. One night, I woke up to find my laptop screen glowing, though I was sure I'd shut it down hours before. My files had been accessed, folders moved. My heart thundered in my chest, as I realized they were trying to erase me, to bury everything I'd found. I slammed the lid shut and pressed my back against the door, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of secrets, and every wave that crashed over me pushed me deeper under. That's when I decided I had to know everything. I couldn't stand the half-truths, the suspicions that kept me awake at night. I started, reaching out to old contacts, people who'd worked in the same offices, the same backrooms. Most of them didn't want to talk. Some hung up before I'd finished saying my name. But one night, a former colleague named Javier called me back. His voice was low and hurried, but there was fear in it too. "Rachel, you don't know what you're dealing with," he said, his words rushed and clipped. "It's not just some accounting errors. This goes higher than you think. They've been moving money, millions, through fake accounts, paying off people to keep it quiet." My blood turned to ice. I asked him for proof, for anything to help me understand the scale of it. But he only sighed, and I could hear the resignation in his voice. "I can't give you more. I've got a family. Just be careful, okay?" I hung up and sat in the dark, my phone clutched in my hand like a lifeline. The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was terrifying. I realized that I wasn't just up against a single supervisor's greed. I was up against a system, a network of power and money that didn't care who it crushed to stay alive. The weight of it settled over me like a heavy shroud. My nights became endless loops of fear and determination, my days spent scouring the records I'd managed to keep. Every new detail felt like a cut, sharp and deep, but I couldn't stop. I needed to know. I needed to see it all laid bare. But even as I dug deeper, I knew I was still on the outside. I didn't have the smoking gun, the final proof that would make the world believe me. I was just one voice, one woman fighting a battle that felt too big to win. Yet I couldn't turn away. My father's voice echoed in my mind, telling me that sometimes doing the right thing meant standing alone. I didn't know how far I'd have to go, or what it would cost me. But I knew I couldn't back down. Not now. Not when the truth was so close I could almost taste it. It was late on a Thursday night when I found it. The document that changed everything. I was hunched over my small desk, eyes bleary from hours of staring at spreadsheets, when I saw an email buried in a chain of routine communications. It was from a dummy account I didn't recognize, a single line in the middle of a conversation that otherwise looked harmless. "Transfer complete. Move the funds as discussed." My heart stuttered as I read those words. My fingers trembled as I clicked through the chain, realizing that I'd stumbled onto the thread that connected everything, a direct line from the so-called performance issues that got me fired to the missing millions Javier had hinted at. This wasn't some accounting oversight. It was deliberate, coordinated. I printed the email and pinned it to my kitchen wall, a silent monument to the betrayal that had upended my life. For a moment, the weight of it was overwhelming. My mind raced with images of the people I'd worked alongside, their easy smiles and quick handshakes, each one a potential accomplice in this grand deception. I felt the room tilt, my vision narrowing to that single page. But then, like a flickering light in the darkness, something else sparked within me. Resolve. I wasn't going to let them win. I started building a case, carefully and methodically, like a detective in one of those old black and white movies my dad loved. I knew I had to be smart. If they suspected what I was doing, they'd come for me harder than before. So I played the part of the shattered ex-employee, someone they could dismiss and forget. But behind that mask, I was gathering every shred of evidence I could find. I reached out to a former IT guy I'd known, someone I trusted. I told him just enough to get him to help without putting him in the line of fire. He showed me how to access the metadata behind those emails, how to prove they weren't just harmless notes, but instructions for illegal transfers. I watched the data come alive on my screen, each line of code, another nail in the coffin of their lies. The more I found, the more I felt the fear recede. It wasn't gone. No, it was still there, a constant pressure at the back of my skull. But it was joined by something stronger. Purpose. I realized that I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a witness, a warrior. My father would have been proud. I started keeping a journal, documenting everything I learned, every lead I chased down. Some nights, I'd sit in the dark and just write. My thoughts, my fears, my plans. It became a ritual, a way to keep myself sane. The more I wrote, the clearer it all became. This wasn't just about me. It was about all the people they'd stolen from, the lives they'd ruined to feed their greed. I reached out to a few former colleagues I thought I could trust. I was careful, choosing only those who'd shown flashes of conscience, the ones who'd looked away when things didn't add up but hadn't yet sold their souls entirely. One of them was Mark, a soft-spoken analyst who'd always seemed uneasy with the company's creative accounting. I met him at a diner on the edge of town, our voices low as we spoke over stale coffee and cold pie. "Rachel, you're playing with fire," he said, his eyes darting around the empty room. "You're talking about taking down people with real power." "I know," I said, my voice steady, "but if we don't stop them, they'll keep destroying lives. I have proof, Mark. I just need help." He hesitated, chewing his lip until it was raw. Finally, he nodded. "Okay, I'm in. But we do this smart, quiet." Together, we pieced together the puzzle. Mark had access to records I didn't even know existed. Expense reports, bonus statements, internal memos that confirmed my suspicions. We spent hours cross-referencing everything, building a timeline that showed how the fraud had grown like a cancer within the company. It wasn't just one or two bad actors. It was systemic. I started to feel like I was living in two worlds. By day, I was the quiet ex-employee, telling friends and family that I was figuring things out. But by night, I was something else entirely, an investigator, a strategist. My apartment became a war room, walls covered in notes and red string, every inch of space filled with the tangled web I was slowly unraveling. The fear never went away. Every time I stepped outside, I felt like I was being watched. Sometimes I'd catch a shadow moving just a little too quickly behind me, or see the same dark sedan parked on my street for days at a time. But the fear didn't stop me. If anything, it made me sharper, more focused. I knew that I was getting close to the heart of it all, the place where the real power was hidden. I didn't know what would happen when I finally exposed it. Part Noor of me was terrified that they'd find a way to bury me, to erase everything I'd done. But I also knew that I couldn't stop. I'd come too far. I'd seen too much, and deep down, I believed that if I kept going, if I kept shining a light on their darkness, I could force them to answer for what they'd done. Maybe I'd even find a way to reclaim the pieces of myself they'd tried to steal. The woman they fired for speaking the truth was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone ready to fight. The day I decided to step into the light was the day everything changed. I'd spent weeks collecting every shred of evidence, emails, bank statements, recordings of whispered conversations in parking lots. My apartment looked like a scene from a crime thriller, red string connecting names and dates, the smell of stale coffee and anxiety hanging in the air. But I knew I was ready to bring it all out from the shadows and force them to face the truth. I started with a letter, an anonymous tip sent to a reporter I'd met once at a conference. Her name was Naomi Pierce, and she had a reputation for digging deeper than anyone else. I didn't trust easily, not anymore, but something about her fierce eyes told me she wouldn't flinch. I sent her everything, the emails, the hidden transfers, the paper trail that showed how my former company had laundered millions. I didn't sign my name, but I knew she'd find me eventually. The next day, I met Mark in a cramped corner booth, at a diner we'd come to think of as neutral ground. His hands were shaking as he stirred his coffee, the spoon clinking nervously against the ceramic. "They're going to come after us, Rachel," he said, his voice a whisper. "Once this gets out, they'll do everything to shut us up." "I know," I said. My voice was calm, almost eerily so. "But it's too late for them to bury it now. Naomi has it all. It's already in motion. He looked at me then, really. Looked at me and I could see the fear in his eyes. But underneath it there was something else, respect. Maybe even hope. We parted ways with a quick hug, neither of us sure if we'd see each other again. I walked home in the chill night air, every step feeling like a declaration of war. I didn't sleep that night. My phone buzzed constantly, calls from Naomi, updates from Mark, and voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize. Threats and promises, all of them laced with desperation. At dawn, I packed a small bag, essentials just in case. My laptop, copies of everything I'd collected, and a note from my mother in case I didn't come back. I wasn't naive. I knew how far they'd go to protect themselves. When Naomi finally called, her voice was electric with urgency. "Rachel, I've got it. I'm going to run the story tonight, but I need you to come forward. Anonymous tips don't carry weight like a first-hand account does." I hesitated, my fingers tight around the phone. I thought of all the sleepless nights, the fear that had become a second skin. But I also thought of the people they'd hurt, the lives they'd stolen to line their pockets. And I thought of my father, who'd taught me that the truth mattered more than anything. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steady. "I'll testify. I'll put my name to it." The hours that followed were a blur. Naomi set up an interview at a local station, somewhere small enough to be safe, but big enough to be heard. I sat in front of the camera, my hands trembling in my lap as I told my story. Every word felt like tearing open an old wound, but I didn't stop. I laid it all out. The emails, the money, the way they'd fired me to keep me silent. My voice cracked a few times, but I didn't let the tears fall. I wanted them to see my strength, not my fear. When the interview aired that night, the reaction was immediate. My phone exploded with messages, some supportive, some venomous. Friends I hadn't heard from in years reached out to say they were proud of me. Strangers sent me messages of solidarity and hope. But there were also threats, dark promises from faceless cowards who wanted me to know I was still in their sights. The next morning, I got the call I'd been both dreading and hoping for. Congress wanted me to testify. They were opening an inquiry into the fraud, and they wanted my first-hand account. My hands shook as I listened to the staffer's calm voice explain the process. I said yes before he'd even finished. My heart was hammering in my chest, but I knew this was my moment. My chance to make them answer for everything they'd done. The day I walked into the Capitol, I felt like I was walking into the lion's den. The hallways echoed with the weight of history, the marble floors cold beneath my feet. My name was on the roster, my story in the hands of people who could finally do something about it. When I took the oath, my voice was clear and steady. My palms were slick with sweat, but I didn't falter. I looked out at the faces of the lawmakers, some skeptical, some already convinced, and I told them everything. The betrayal, the threats, the documents that proved it all. The air in the room was electric, each word a hammer blow against the walls they'd built to keep their secrets safe. I could see some of them shifting uncomfortably, their eyes darting away as I laid bare the truth. But I didn't care. I was done hiding. Done being afraid. By the time I finished, I felt like I'd given them a piece of my soul. I stepped back. From the microphone, my hands shaking but my heart calm. The applause was muted, polite, professional, but I didn't need their cheers. I had my truth and I'd made them see it. As I walked out of that room, the sunlight streaming through the high windows, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was the woman who wouldn't be silenced, the one who'd face them all and refused to back down. The days that followed my testimony moved in a blur, each headline a small victory in the war I'd waged against them. My story was everywhere, on the front pages, across the scrolling, banners of news channels, in hushed conversations in coffee shops and office hallways. The men who had once dismissed me as a nuisance, a problem to be swept away, were now forced to answer for every lie they'd told. The investigations moved. Quickly after that, the documents I'd provided were too detailed, too damning to ignore. Grand juries were convened, subpoenas issued. One by one, the people who'd tried to bury me were dragged into the light, their faces pale as they walked past reporters, no longer able to hide behind boardroom doors. I watched the press conferences, the way their names were spoken with the weight of shame. I saw the disbelief in the eyes of their families, the colleagues who had once laughed at my warnings. There was a grim satisfaction in knowing they'd never again be able to pretend they were innocent. The truth was out now, and it was bigger than any of them. But even as I felt that satisfaction, there was a hollow ache inside me. I'd won a battle, yes, but I'd lost something too. My faith in the people I'd once trusted was gone, replaced by a quiet wariness I knew would never fully leave me. At night, I still woke from dreams of shadowy figures and locked doors, my heart racing in the darkness. But in the light of day, I felt stronger. I'd faced them. I'd spoken the truth. Mark and I kept in touch, sharing quiet updates over late-night calls. He was still working at the company, helping the investigators piece together the rest of the puzzle. His voice was tired but hopeful. "You did it, Rachel," he told me one night. "You didn't just save yourself, you saved everyone who was too afraid to speak." I didn't know if saving was the right word, but I knew I'd done what I had to do. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. One evening, I walked down to the riverfront, the city skyline sharp and bright against the twilight. I leaned against the railing, the wind cool on my face, and let the quiet wash over me. The battle wasn't over. There were still courtrooms and depositions ahead. But I'd done what I'd set out to do. I'd shown them that one voice, determined and unyielding, could bring down even the most powerful walls. As I stood there, I thought of my father and his unwavering belief in doing what was right. I felt the weight of everything I'd lost, and everything I'd gained. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself feel something close to peace. In the weeks after my testimony, I began to rebuild my life piece by piece, no longer driven by fear but by a sense of purpose that felt stronger and truer than anything I'd ever known. The investigation grew beyond me, swept up in the tide of public outrage. It was no longer just my story. It was a reckoning for everyone who'd ever been silenced by greed and power. I watched from a distance as the company I'd once been proud to work for crumbled under the weight of its own corruption. Executives were indicted, board members forced to resign. It was messy and slow, but it was happening. The people who thought they were untouchable had finally been forced to answer for their crimes. Meanwhile, I found myself in a quieter space, away from the glare of cameras and headlines. I moved out of my small apartment and into a sunlit place near the river, a place with warm wooden floors and windows that opened to the breeze. It felt like a sanctuary, a new chapter, free from the shadows of the past. I took long walks by, the water in the mornings letting the sound of the river wash over me. My phone didn't ring as often anymore, and the silence was a gift. I spent hours reading and writing, my journal no longer just a record of my fears, but a place to dream again. For the first time in so long, I felt like my life was my own. I didn't go back to the world of finance. I knew I couldn't. The thought of returning to that cold world of half-truths and backroom deals made my stomach twist. Instead, I started working with advocacy groups, helping others find the courage to speak out. I shared my story when it was needed, sat in quiet rooms with people who were still too afraid to say the words. I told them that the truth was worth the cost, that even when it felt like you were standing alone, you weren't. Sometimes I still felt the echoes of everything I'd lost, the friends who'd turned away, the career I'd built that was gone in a heartbeat. But those echoes didn't haunt me like they once had. They were reminders of the woman I'd been, and the woman I'd become. I was stronger now, wiser. I carried scars, but they were part of the story that had brought me here. One afternoon, I got a letter in the mail, a simple note from the congressional committee thanking me for my courage. It wasn't the kind of thing most people would frame or hang on a wall, but I kept it tucked away in a drawer. It was a reminder that what I'd done had mattered, that my voice had been heard. As I sat on my balcony that evening, the sun setting, in a blaze of gold and rose, I realized how far I'd come. I wasn't the woman who'd walked out of that glass tower with a cardboard box and a broken heart. I was someone who'd faced the darkness and refused to be consumed by it. I closed my eyes and breathed in the warm summer air, a quiet smile playing on my lips. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I'd found something more important than a paycheck or a title. I'd found the strength to stand up, to speak out, and to keep going, even when the world tried to break me. And in that moment of calm, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Looking back on everything, I realized that what happened wasn't just about corruption or fraud. It was about the choice to stand up for what's right, even when the world is telling you to stay silent. It's about the strength we find when we're pushed to the edge, and the courage it takes to keep going when the ground crumbles beneath our feet. In those long nights of doubt and fear, I learned that justice isn't something handed down from above. It's something we build with our own hands, piece by piece, choice by choice. It's in every small act of defiance, every whispered truth that refuses to stay buried. And when we dare to speak those truths, even when we're trembling, we light a spark that can't be put out. I think about all the people who watched me walk away from that building with my head held high, the ones who thought I was just another casualty of a system built on silence, but they were wrong. Because the real power isn't in the titles or the corner offices. It's in the quiet certainty that your voice matters. That no matter how small or afraid you feel, you can still make them listen. Sometimes I wonder if I would do it all again. Knowing what I know now, the sleepless nights, the fear, the friends I lost along the way. And every time, my answer is yes. Because the cost of staying silent would have been so much greater than the cost of speaking up. I hope, wherever you are, that you remember this. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. Even if the world tries to tell you otherwise. Because in the end, it's not the people with the loudest voices or the deepest pockets who change the world. It's the ones who refuse to look away. The ones who stand up when it would be easier to sit down. The ones who hold on to hope, even in the darkest hour. So when you find yourself faced with that choice, when you feel the weight of fear and doubt pressing down, remember my story. Remember that one voice, even one, can break the silence, and that sometimes the quietest truths are the ones that echo the longest.